I always thought of myself as the lucky one. The odds were stacked against me, yet here I am, still breathing, still living, still haunted. The others weren't so lucky. I wish I could say I escaped because of some cleverness or strength of mine, but the truth is, it wasn't like that at all. It wasn't about survival of the fittest, just survival of the...
What?
The fortunate. The damned. I've been riding with my club, the Night Wolves, for over a decade. That night was just supposed to be another ride, another chance to feel the freedom of the open road, the wind whipping across my face, the vibration of my Harley beneath me like a living thing. As usual, I had my headphones on, tuning out the world, sinking into one of those horror stories from the Fear Frequencies channel. It was a habit of mine. As some people smoke or chew gum, I liked getting into that eerie headspace while riding. It kept me sharp and aware. Ironic, isn't it? How could listening to tales of horror make you feel more alive? That evening, the sky had that kind of soft bruise color, you know? The whole world seems to be holding its breath when the sun's dipping low. We were heading down a back road I'd never seen before, cutting through a dense, pine-covered forest. Our road captain Mikey led the way. He always found these out-of-the-way routes, saying they had character and kept us from becoming road zombies, just mindlessly following the interstate like everyone else. I remember feeling an odd sense of unease that day, the way the trees seemed to bend over the road, their branches knotted and reaching like bony fingers, trying to claw us back into their dark embrace. The air was heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth, and I could swear the shadows moved, danced, almost between the trunks as the sun dipped lower. I shook it off, chalking it up to the latest story I was listening to. It was some creepy tale about a haunted forest that seemed too on the nose then. It was Mikey's idea to camp by the lake. A hidden gem, he called it. The water's crystal clear, untouched. None of that tourist crap. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, to be honest. But Mikey had that infectious grin, and you go along when you're part of a club. You trust your brothers. Besides, what could be perfect? A lake, a campfire, and a night under the stars with nothing but the sound of crickets and the crackling fire to keep us company. Hell, it sounded like a dream. As we rolled up to the lake, the sky had turned that deep indigo, the first stars blinking awake. It was quiet, too quiet in hindsight. There were no birds or wind, just the soft lapping of the lake against the shore and the crunch of gravel under our boots. I pulled off my headphones, letting the silence settle in my ears, but that only seemed to amplify the strange stillness. We set up camp quickly, the guys joking around, passing beers. Someone had a small portable speaker, and soon, classic rock tunes filled the air, easing the tension. We didn't have a care in the world then, just brothers on the road, feeling invincible. I didn't notice it at first, but as the night wore on, the lake seemed to take on a different kind of sound. I can't quite describe it. It was subtle, like a faint hum, almost a whisper, weaving through the music and laughter. I thought maybe it was just the wind picking up over the water or some kind of weird acoustics. But something about it made my skin prickle. Then I heard it clear as day, a woman's voice, soft, melodic like a lullaby drifting on the breeze. I looked around, half expecting to see someone playing a joke. But the guys were too busy with their conversations, none of them paying any mind. I took a swig of my beer and shook my head, trying to shake the strange feeling creeping up my spine. But then I heard it again. This time I wasn't the only one. Mikey stopped mid-sentence, his face turning toward the lake. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I heard it," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. "Sounded like singing?" The others looked at us like we were crazy, but then, one by one, I saw their expressions change. They were confused, curious, and afraid. The voice grew louder and more distinct, drifting over the water like a siren. And then there were more, 2, 3, maybe 4 voices, all blending in a haunting, hypnotic harmony. It was beautiful, and yet, there was something else there, something wrong, a hidden edge that sent a shiver down my spine. "We need to check this out," Mikey said, already standing, his eyes fixed on the dark waters. He was always the curious one, always needing to know what was behind the next bend, what lay just beyond sight. The rest of us exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between us. Against my better judgment, I stood up. "I'll go with you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe it was the beer, the camaraderie, or just plain stupidity. But something drove me to follow him, even though every instinct was screaming at me to stay put, to stay by the fire where it was safe. The others, Rick, Bobby, and Trey, were slower to rise, their faces painted with uncertainty. But the voices, Those damned voices kept calling, pulling at us like invisible strings. Before I knew it, we were all standing at the lake's edge, staring into the inky blackness, trying to see where the sound was coming from. The moon was high, casting a silver glow over the water, but it was still too dark to see anything. Mikey cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hello?" he called out. "Is someone out there?" There was nothing but silence for a moment, and then, like an answer to a prayer, the voices returned closer this time. I could see something moving in the water, just beyond the edge of the moonlight's reach. I thought of a figure, a woman, her hair dark and flowing, her skin pale as the moon. "Mikey, I don't think this is a good idea," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. But he didn't seem to hear me. He was already stepping into the water, his boots sinking into the soft mud. "Mikey, wait!" I called out louder this time, reaching out to grab his arm, but he shrugged me off, his eyes locked on the figure in the water. And then she stepped forward into the light, and I felt my blood turn to ice. She was beautiful, no doubt about that, but in a way that was almost painful to look at. Her eyes were too large, too bright, her smile too wide, her teeth sharp. Mikey. I tried again, but he was gone, wading deeper into the water, his arms outstretched as if reaching for an old lover. The others were following now, their faces slack, their eyes glazed. I tried to stop them, tried to shout, but my voice seemed to die in my throat, swallowed by the darkness around us. I watched in horror as the women, there were more of them now, I realized. A dozen. Maybe more emerged from the water, their movements slow, deliberate, predatory. They were half naked, their skin glistening with water, their hair clinging to their bodies like dark, wet seaweed. My heart was pounding in my chest and my breaths were coming in short, panicked gasps. I wanted to run, turn and get out of there, but I was rooted to the spot, my feet like lead. Mikey reached the first of the women, his hands moving to cup her face, and for a moment I thought I saw her smile. A cold, cruel smile that sent a chill through my bones. And then, with a sudden, brutal motion, she lunged forward, her teeth sinking into his throat. I heard Mikey scream, a gurgling, wet sound that echoed in the still night air. Blood sprayed across the lake's surface, dark and glistening in the moonlight. The others didn't react. They kept moving forward, their expressions blank, as if they were sleepwalking. I don't remember deciding to run. One moment I was standing there, frozen in place, and the next I was sprinting back toward the campsite, my heart hammering in my chest, my lungs burning with each breath. I could hear the voices behind me, those terrible, haunting voices, still singing, calling, but I didn't dare look back. I crashed through the trees, branches whipping against my face, tearing at my clothes. I stumbled once, twice, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The campsite was just ahead, the fire still burning, a small flickering beacon in the darkness. I reached it, collapsing onto the ground, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment I thought I was safe, and had somehow escaped whatever horror had overtaken the others. But then I heard the soft, rhythmic splash of footsteps coming out of the water. They were coming for me. I lay there on the ground, gasping for breath, my mind racing. The soft splashes of water became louder, closer, the sound of bare feet on wet earth. The voices. Those damn voices were still singing, their melody sweet and terrible, weaving their way into my thoughts like a parasite. I knew I had to get up and move, but my body felt like lead, every muscle screaming in protest. Get up, damn it. My mind screamed at me, and somehow, through sheer force of will, I pushed myself onto my knees. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred with tears of fear and exhaustion. I tried to focus, tried to think of what to do next, but all I could see was Mikey's face. That moment of horror frozen in my mind. His eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent scream as that thing tore into him. I could hear them now, the women moving through the trees. I couldn't see them yet, but heard their soft, almost playful giggles. They weren't in a hurry. They knew they had me. They knew I had nowhere to go. I stumbled to my feet, my legs wobbly beneath me, and looked around frantically. The bikes! They were just a few yards away, parked in a neat row like they always were. I might have a chance if I could just make it to my bike. I could get away, go for help, anything. Just get the hell out of here. I forced myself to move, every step feeling like wading through thick mud. The world seemed to tilt and spin around me, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears that it drowned out everything else. I reached my bike, nearly collapsing against it, my hands fumbling for the keys. My fingers were slick with sweat and shaking so badly that I dropped them, a small metallic clang as they hit the ground. No, 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 I muttered, dropping to my knees, my hands scrabbling in the dirt, desperately searching. I could hear them behind me now, the soft rustle of leaves, the almost musical sound of their voices, humming that same eerie tune. I could feel them, feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. My fingers brushed against something cold and metal, and I grabbed the keys, my heart leaping in my chest. I shoved them into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries before I finally got the engine to roar to life. The sound was deafening in the stillness of the night, a thunderous roar that seemed to echo through the trees. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I kicked the bike into gear and gunned the throttle, the tires spinning in the dirt before finally catching and lurching forward. I could hear them now, a chorus of angry, hissing voices rising above the engine's roar. But I didn't care. I was moving.
I was getting away.
The road was just ahead, a narrow dirt path wounding through the trees. I leaned into the bike, my body low, my eyes fixed on the path, trying to ignore the dark shapes moving at the edges of my vision. I could still hear those terrible voices, singing and calling, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, if I even hesitated for a second, they would be on me. I tore down the path, the wind whipping against my face, the trees blurring into a dark wall on either side. I could barely see, my vision narrowing to a tunnel, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away, and as far away from that lake as possible. The road was rough, and the bike bucking and jerking beneath me. But I held on, my hands gripping the handlebars so tightly that my knuckles were white. I could still hear those voices behind me, still singing and calling. But they were fading, growing more distant with each passing second. For a moment I thought I was safe, that I had somehow escaped. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shape moving through the trees, keeping pace with me. I glanced over for a second and saw her, one of the women, running alongside me, her hair streaming behind her like a dark veil, her eyes fixed on me with a look of pure, unbridled hunger. I yanked the bike to the side, nearly crashing into a tree, but I kept pushing the bike harder and faster. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. My body was aching, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I had to try. I had to keep going. The road was curving now, winding through the forest, and I could see a car's headlights up ahead. A faint glimmer of hope in the darkness. I gunned the throttle, pushing the bike to its limit, the engine screaming in protest, but I didn't care. I needed to reach that car, flag it down, and get help. I could hear the voices behind me, still singing, still calling, but they were growing fainter, more distant. I could see the car now, a beat-up old pickup truck, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I waved one hand frantically, trying to get the driver's attention, but the truck kept coming, its speed picking up. "Stop! Stop!" I shouted, my voice hoarse, but the truck didn't slow. It was bearing down on me now, the headlights blinding, and I realized with a sickening lurch that it wouldn't stop. It was going to hit me. I swerved at the last second, the truck roaring past me, missing me by inches. I could feel the rush of air as it passed, the engine's heat. I turned just in time to see the driver's face, blank, empty, eyes wide and unseeing, his mouth moving as if singing along with the voices. He didn't even seem to notice me. I watched as the truck barreled down the road, disappearing into the darkness, and I felt a cold, creeping dread settle over me. Whatever this was, whatever those things were, they had him too. I didn't wait around to see if there were more. I turned the bike back onto the road and kept going. The wind whipping against my face, the darkness closing around me. I rode for what felt like hours, my mind numb, my body on autopilot, until I finally saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance. A real car this time, I hoped. I rode toward them, waving my arms, shouting, and this time, mercifully, the car slowed, pulling to a stop on the side of the road. The driver was a middle-aged man, his face lined with worry as he rolled down the window. "You okay, son?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. I nodded, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. "Please," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You gotta help me. There's something back there." The man glanced past me into the forest darkness and then back at me, his brow furrowed. "What happened?" he asked, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I? How could I make him understand the horror I'd just witnessed? "Please," I repeated more urgently this time. Just drive, get us out of here." He hesitated momentarily, his eyes searching mine, and then he nodded, opening the passenger door. "Get in," he said. I didn't need to be told twice. I climbed into the car, slamming the door behind me, and he hit the gas, the tires screeching as we sped away down the road. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see those women coming after us, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road stretching out behind us, the trees, just looming on either side like silent sentinels. The man kept glancing over at me, his face mixed with curiosity and concern. I could feel his eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. I just stared out the window, watching the darkness slip by, my heart still pounding in my chest, my mind racing with everything I'd just seen. "Son," he said, his voice gentle after a while, "you gotta tell me what happened back there. You look like you've seen a ghost." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my hands trembling in my lap. How could I explain it? How could I put into words the horror that had unfolded before my eyes, the things I'd seen, the things I'd heard? The image of Mikey's face, twisted in agony, flashed through my mind again, and I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. "There were women," I finally managed to say, my voice barely more than a whisper. "At the lake. They weren't human. They killed my friends." The man's eyes widened, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Women?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What do you mean? What happened?" I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what they were. They looked like women, but they weren't. They lured us into the water, and then they attacked." The man was silent momentarily, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could see the muscles in his jaw working, his mind racing. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, his brow furrowed and his lips pressed into a thin line. He thought I was crazy, or maybe drunk or high, but I wasn't. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what had happened. "Listen," he said finally, his voice slow, careful, like talking to a child or a lunatic. "I don't know what you think you saw back there, but you're safe now, okay? We're getting out of here. We'll get you to a hospital and they'll take care of you." I wanted to argue and make him understand, but I was too exhausted and drained. My body felt like it was made of lead, and my eyelids were heavy. I could still hear the faint echo of those voices in my mind, still feel their pull, like a thread tied around my soul, tugging, pulling me back toward that cursed lake. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes, trying to block out the memories, focusing on the steady hum of the car's engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the road. I could feel the man's eyes on me, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible, to forget what I'd seen and what I'd lost. But deep down I knew I never would. I knew those memories would haunt me for the rest of my life, chasing me in my dreams, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when I'd let my guard down, when I'd be vulnerable again. The man drove in silence for what felt like hours, the road stretching out before us like a black ribbon, winding through the forest. I could feel myself drifting, my mind slipping into a foggy haze, exhaustion pulling at me like a weight, dragging me down into darkness. I fought against it and tried to stay awake and keep my eyes open, but it was a losing battle. My body was shutting down, and my mind was overwhelmed by the night's events. I don't know how long I was out, minutes, hours, maybe longer. When I finally opened my eyes again, the car had stopped. We were parked at the side of the road, the headlights still on, illuminating a small, dilapidated gas station. The man was gone. I sat up, blinking, trying to shake off the fog that clouded my mind. The driver's side door was open, swinging gently in the breeze, and there was no sign of the man. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. Like a dark cloud hanging over me, I could feel it pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I glanced around, peering into the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the empty road and the shadowy outline of the gas station. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaky, my throat dry. "Where'd you go?" There was no answer. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant chirp of crickets. I felt a chill run down my spine, my skin prickling with goosebumps. Trembling, I reached for the door handle and stepped out of the car. The air was cold, biting against my skin, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a second skin. I stepped toward the gas station, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. The building was dark, the windows covered in grime, the paint peeling from the walls. There was an old rusted gas pump out front. The numbers on the dial faded and cracked. I could see a faint glow from inside, a flickering light like a candle or a lantern. "Hey!" I called out again, my voice louder this time, more insistent. "Are you in there?" There was still no answer. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a sickening dread that twisted my insides. I took another step forward, my feet crunching on the gravel, the sound loud in the stillness of the night. I could feel the darkness pressing around me, the shadows shifting, moving like they were alive. I reached the door and pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The inside of the gas station was dark, the air heavy with the smell of dust and decay. I saw rows of empty shelves, a cracked counter and a broken cash register. The flickering light came from the back, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing in the space. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my breaths came in short, shallow gasps. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, the cold chill of fear gripping my body. I didn't know what I was doing or why I was even going in there, but something was pulling me forward, some unseen force drawing me deeper into the darkness. As I rounded the corner, I saw him. The man who'd picked me up was standing in the back of the store, his back to me, his head bowed. The flickering light was coming from a small, old-fashioned lantern on the floor beside him. His shoulders were hunched, his hands clenched at his sides. "Hey," I said, my voice shaky. "What are you doing? We need to get out of here." He didn't respond, didn't move. I just stood there, staring down at something on the floor. I took a step closer, my heart in my throat. "Hey," I said louder this time, reaching out to touch his shoulder again. As soon as my hand made contact, he spun around, his eyes wide, his face pale. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. There was something wrong with his eyes. They were blank, empty, like he wasn't seeing me, like he wasn't there. "Get out," he whispered, his voice low, almost a growl. "Get out now." "What?" I stammered, my mind racing. "What's going on?" "Get out," he screamed, his voice suddenly loud, his face contorted with fear. "They're here, they're coming." I didn't need to be told again. I turned and bolted for the door, my heart pounding and my feet slipping on the dusty floor. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy, frantic, and then the voices. They were back. Those terrible, haunting voices, singing that same eerie melody, were growing louder and closer. I could feel them, like a cold hand reaching for me, pulling at me. I burst through the door, stumbling into the night, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding. I ran for the car, but as I reached it, I froze. The headlights were still on, illuminating the road, and there, standing in the middle of the light, were the women, the ones from the lake. Their skin glistened in the dim light, and their eyes were fixed on me, hungry and predatory. I could feel my legs trembling beneath me, my body frozen with fear. They didn't move, they just stood there, watching, waiting. The man was behind me now, his breath hot and ragged in my ear. "They found us," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They never let you go?" I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I choked it down, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. I had to get away. I turned, my eyes searching for any way out, any path that would take me away from this nightmare. And then I saw a narrow path leading into the woods, just off the road. Without thinking, I bolted for it, my feet pounding against the ground, the voices still echoing in my ears, growing louder and closer. I could hear the man behind me, his footsteps heavy and frantic, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I just kept running deeper into the darkness, the trees closing in around me, the shadows swallowing me whole. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know if I was running toward safety or deeper into danger. But I knew one thing, I couldn't let them catch me. I couldn't let them take me back to that lake. I ran until my legs gave out, until my lungs burned and my vision blurred, and even then I didn't stop. I stumbled, fell, got back up and kept going, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of terror. And then suddenly the ground gave way beneath me. I felt myself falling, tumbling down a steep embankment, the world spinning around me in a blur of darkness and pain. I hit the ground hard, the air rushing from my lungs, and for a moment I lay there, dazed, the world spinning around me. I could hear them above me, their voices still singing, still calling, but they were farther away now. I struggled to my feet, my body aching, every muscle screaming in protest, and looked around. I was in a small, narrow ravine with steep walls and thick brush. I could see a faint glimmer of light above, but it was too far to climb. I didn't have a choice. I turned and started moving, pushing my way through the brush, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I could still hear the voices and feel their pull, but I kept moving, pushing forward, one foot in front of the other, driven by some primal instinct to survive and escape. I don't know how long I wandered in that darkness, stumbling over rocks and roots, the voices growing fainter with each step. Hours, maybe days. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless, shadowy maze. I was exhausted, my body battered and bruised, my mind frayed and teetering on the edge of madness. But then finally, I saw a faint glow in the distance, a flicker of light through the trees. I pushed toward it, my heart pounding, hope rising in my chest like a drowning man reaching for the surface. I stumbled out of the trees and into a clearing, and there, standing in the middle of the clearing, was a small cabin, its windows glowing with warm golden light. I staggered toward it, my legs barely holding me up, my vision blurring with tears. I reached the door and pounded, desperate and frantic, my fists slamming against the wood. "Help!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Please help me." The door creaked open, and I was greeted by the sight of an old woman, her face lined with age, her eyes kind but wary. "What's all this noise?" she asked, her voice soft, almost gentle. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "You have to help me. They're after me." The women. They're... She didn't say a word, just stepped aside, opening the door wider. I didn't hesitate. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The old woman closed the door behind me, bolting it shut, and then turned to me, her eyes dark and unreadable. "And you shouldn't have come here," she said softly, whispering in the dark. "They don't like it when you run." I felt a chill run down my spine, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Who are they? What are they?" She just shook her head, her eyes distant, haunted. "They've been here for a long time," she said. "Longer than you can imagine. They belong to the lake, and once they have your scent, they never stop." I felt a wave of despair wash over me, the last bit of hope I'd been clinging to slipping away like water through my fingers. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I knew deep down that I'd never really escaped, that I'd never be free of them. And then just outside the window I heard it again. Their song's soft, haunting melody, drifting through the night, growing louder and closer. They'd found me. They always do. The old woman's words echoed in my mind, repeating repeatedly, as if they were the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. They never stop. I stared at her, my breath still coming in uneven gasps, 1,000 questions clamoring to be asked, but only one made its way out of my throat, raw and desperate. "What are they?" I whispered, my voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "What do they want?" The old woman sighed, her face lined with shadows that seemed to deepen in the flickering light of the lantern she held. Though milky with age, her eyes held a sharpness, an awareness that chilled me to the bone. "They're not human," she said, voice low, almost reverent. "They were once, maybe long ago. But now, there's something else. Something darker. They feed on fear, on desperation. They lure you in with their beauty and voices, and then consume you." Her words sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me. I thought of Mikey, of the others, walking into the lake as if in a trance, their eyes glazed over, their faces slack with some twisted form of serenity, just moments before those things attacked. The memory was still raw like a fresh wound, and it hurt to think about it. It hurt to think about anything other than the cold, hard fact that I was still alive. I didn't know why or how I'd escaped, but I knew one thing. I wasn't safe. Not yet. "You said they've been here a long time," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "How long?" She turned away, her gaze distant as if she were looking back through time itself. "Longer than this town, longer than any of us. The stories go back generations. My grandmother told me about them when I was a child. She said they were spirits of the lake, cursed for some crime long forgotten. Or maybe they were always here, waiting for the lost and the desperate, for those who wander too close." I shuddered, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to stave off the chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. "Why don't people leave?" I asked. "Why stay here knowing what's out there?" She gave a bitter laugh, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Leave? And go where? This is our home, we know the rules, we know how to keep them at bay. But outsiders, well, they don't usually stay around long enough to learn." I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but before I could speak, a sound cut through the night. A soft melodic humming drifting in through the cracks around the door and the windows, as if it were seeping through the very walls. The sound was beautiful and haunting, and it sent a wave of panic through me. I felt my body tense, my muscles locking up and my heart rate skyrocketing. The old woman's face tightened, her eyes narrowing. "They're here," she whispered, her voice taut with fear. "They know you're here, they've come for you." My breath hitched in my throat. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How do we stop them?" She moved quickly, surprising me with her speed. She grabbed a large, heavy chest from the corner of the room and began rummaging through it. Her movements were hurried but precise. "We don't stop them," she said, her voice muffled as she searched. "We can't. All we can do is hold them off, for a little while." I watched as she pulled out a handful of objects, bundles of dried herbs. a thick, dark liquid vial, and a handful of old, worn stones etched with strange symbols. She moved around the room with practiced efficiency, placing the items on the windowsills near the door, muttering words under her breath that I didn't understand. What are those?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Wards," she said shortly. "Protections. They don't like them, keeps them out most of the time." I wanted to ask what she meant by most of the time, but I didn't. I was too scared of the answer. Instead, I watched her work, my body tense, my breath shallow. The singing was getting louder and closer, and I could feel the pull of it, a seductive whisper in the back of my mind, urging me to give in, to let go. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, using the pain to keep myself grounded and from falling under their spell. The old woman finished her preparations and turned to me, her face lined with worry. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't open that door, don't look at them, don't listen to them. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I could hear them now, right outside the door, their voices a soft, hypnotic lullaby that made my eyelids heavy and my thoughts fuzzy. I shook my head, trying to clear it and focus on the old woman's words, on anything other than the sound of their voices. "Good," she said, her eyes boring into mine. "Stay here, I'll be back." "Wait!" I grabbed her arm, panic rising in my chest. "Where are you going?" She pulled away from me, her face grim. "I have to make sure they don't find another way in. They're clever. They always find a way." Before I could protest, she was gone, slipping out the back door, leaving me alone in the dimly lit cabin. I could hear her footsteps fading into the darkness, and then nothing. Just the soft, insistent singing, filling the silence like a physical presence, pressing down on me from all sides. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding and my mind racing. I could hear them moving outside, the soft rustle of leaves, the creak of wood. I could see shadows shifting under the door, the faint outline of bare feet. They were right there on the other side, so close I could almost feel their breath on my skin. And then they spoke, not in song but in words. Words that chilled me to the core. "Open the door," a soft voice whispered, seductive, almost pleading. "Please, we won't hurt you. We just want to talk." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was useless. Their voices seemed to slip past every defense, worming their way into my mind. I could feel them, like fingers brushing against my consciousness, gentle but insistent. "Please," another voice whispered, this softer, almost childlike. "We're so cold, let us in. We just want to be warm." I bit down on my lip hard enough to draw blood, using the pain to keep myself grounded. I could feel the pull of their words, like a hook sinking into my brain, drawing me toward the door. I wanted to open it. I wanted to let them in. I wanted to see them, to touch them. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus and remember what the old woman said. "Don't look at them. Don't listen to them." But it was hard, and their voices were beautiful and soothing. I could feel the tension in my body easing, my fear slipping away. All I had to do was open the door and everything would be okay. "Please," a third voice, deeper, more commanding. "We know you're scared. We can make it better. Just open the door." I could feel my hand moving, almost of its own accord, reaching for the latch. I tried to pull it back, tried to stop myself, but it was like my body was no longer my own. The pull was too strong. I was too tired, too weak to fight it anymore. Just as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, a loud, sharp bang echoed through the cabin, snapping me out of my trance. I jerked back, my hand falling to my side, my heart racing. I turned to see the old woman standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Get away from there!" she shouted, her voice sharp, commanding. "Now!" I stumbled back, my legs weak, my mind still foggy. She moved quickly, crossing the room in a few swift strides, slamming her hand against the door, muttering something under her breath. The voices outside grew louder, more insistent, their tone shifting from seductive to angry, a sharp edge creeping into their words. The old woman grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the door. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone her age. "I told you not to listen," she hissed, her eyes flashing with anger and fear. "They almost had you." "I'm sorry," I stammered, my voice shaking. I didn't mean to, I just..." She shook her head, cutting me off. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice tight. "We need to move. They know we're here. They'll keep coming until they get in." I nodded, my mind still reeling, my body trembling with fear. "Where do we go?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes narrowing. "There's a cellar," she said. "It's not much, but it's strong. We can hold out there. For a while." I followed her as she moved to a small door in the corner of the room, pulling it open to reveal a narrow set of stairs leading down into the darkness. I hesitated, a fresh wave of fear washing over me. I didn't want to go down there. I didn't want to be trapped in that dark, confined space with those things outside, but I knew I had no choice. The old woman descended the stairs quickly and I followed, my heart in my throat, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The cellar was small and cramped, the air damp and musty. She lit a small lantern, casting a dim, flickering light over the stone walls and the rough wooden beams above. She closed the door behind us, bolting it shut, and we sat there in silence, listening to the sounds above, the soft, melodic singing, the rustle of leaves, the creak of wood. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. "How long do we stay down here?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The old woman didn't answer right away. She just stared at the door, her face lined with worry, her eyes distant. Finally, she turned to me, her expression grim. "As long as it takes," she said softly. "As long as it takes." And so we waited. We waited in that dark, damp cellar, listening to the voices outside, to their haunting, hypnotic song, knowing that they were out there, waiting, watching, never stopping, knowing that we would never be safe as long as they were out there. I didn't know how long we'd last, how long we could hold out. But I knew one thing for sure. They wouldn't give up. They never did. And I knew that sooner or later they'd get in. Hours passed. Or maybe it was just minutes. It was hard to tell in the pitch-black confines of the cellar. The air was thick with dust and a damp, earthy smell that clung to the back of my throat, making it hard to breathe. My mind raced, replaying the events repeatedly, and each moment burned into my memory like a brand. I could still hear the voices above us, their haunting melodies drifting down through the floorboards, filling the small space with a dread that seemed to crawl under my skin. The old woman sat across from me, her eyes closed, lips moving in a silent prayer. I could see the lines etched into her face, deep grooves of worry and fear, and I wondered how many times she'd sat here like this, hiding from the things outside, praying for the morning to come. "Does this ever end?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Do they ever go away?" Her eyes opened, meeting mine. There was a weariness there, a heaviness that spoke of years, decades of fear and hiding. "Sometimes," she said softly. "Sometimes they leave, but they always come back, they always come back." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Why don't you leave?" I asked again, unable to understand why anyone would stay in a place like this, knowing what lurked just beyond the trees. She shook her head. "This is my home," she said. "It's where I grew up, where I buried my parents, my husband, my son. I can't leave. And besides, they'd find me wherever I went. They won't let you go once they have you." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Was that what my life was going to be now? Running? Hiding? Always looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to come? I couldn't live like that. I wouldn't. "There has to be a way," I said more to myself than to her. "There has to be something we can do to stop them." She gave me a sad, knowing smile. "Many have tried," she said. "Hunters, priests, even some from the government. They all thought they could stop it, but they were wrong. You can't fight them. You can't kill what's already dead." I shook my head, refusing to accept it. "No," I said more forcefully. "There has to be a way. There's always a way." She sighed, a long, weary sound coming from deep within her soul. "There might be," she said finally, "but it's dangerous, and it's not something I've ever tried." I leaned forward, my heart racing with fear and hope. "What is it?" I asked. "Tell me, I'll do it." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "The lake," she said finally. "That's where they come from. It's their home, their source. It has to be there if there's any way to stop them. But the lake, it's dangerous. It's cursed. No one who goes there ever comes back." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. The idea of going back to that place, of facing those things again, filled me with a terror so deep it was almost paralyzing. But what choice did I have? I couldn't live the rest of my life in fear, hiding in the shadows, always looking over my shoulder. I had to do something. I had to try. "Tell me what to do," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. She studied me for a long moment, as if weighing my resolve, my courage. Finally, she nodded. "There's an old story," she said. "My grandmother used to tell it. It said that the lake was once a place of great power, where the veil between worlds was thin. The spirits of the lake are trapped there, bound by some ancient curse. If you can find the source of that curse, break it. Maybe, just maybe, you can send them back to where they came from." I felt a flicker of hope, small but bright like a candle in the dark. "How do I find it?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "The stories aren't clear. Some say it's a stone, a relic hidden deep beneath the water. Others say it's a spirit, a guardian who holds the power to bind and unbind. All I know is that if you go there, you must be prepared. They'll do everything they can to stop you." I nodded, determination settling in my chest like a lead weight. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll go." She reached out, her hand resting on mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "Be careful," she said softly. "And remember, whatever you hear, whatever you see, don't listen. Don't trust your eyes, the lake is full of lies." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I had to try. I had to do something. I couldn't live like this. Couldn't let those things keep terrorizing me, keep taking people. I had to end it one way or another. We waited in the cellar a while longer, the old woman muttering prayers under her breath, her eyes closed, her hands clutching a small, worn crucifix. The voices above seemed to grow more agitated, their songs becoming sharper and frantic, as if they knew we were planning something and could sense my resolve. Finally, the old woman opened her eyes, her expression grim. "It's time," she said. "The sun will be up soon. They're weaker in the daylight, but they're not gone. You'll have a better chance if you go now." I nodded, swallowing my fear, and pushed myself to my feet. My body ached, my muscles stiff from hours of tension, but I forced myself to move, to follow her up the narrow stairs back into the dimly lit cabin. The air was cold, the shadows long and deep, but I could see a faint glow on the horizon, the first light of dawn creeping through the trees. The old woman handed me a small bundle dried herbs, a vial of that dark liquid, and a few strange stones. "Take these," she said. "They might help. And remember, don't listen to them, don't trust them." I took the bundle, stuffing it into my jacket pocket, my heart pounding. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. She nodded, her eyes softening for a moment. "May God go with you," she said softly. I turned and stepped out into the cold morning air, the chill biting against my skin. The world was eerily silent, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I saw the path leading back to the lake, a dark, narrow trail winding through the trees. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and started walking. The forest was dark, the shadows deep and long, and I could feel the weight of the night still pressing down on me. Every step felt heavy, my boots crunching on the frosted ground, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead, focused on the task at hand, trying to ignore the fear gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The lake appeared suddenly as if it had been waiting for me. The water was still, a dark, glassy surface reflecting the first light of dawn. I saw the mist rising off the surface, twisting and curling like ghostly fingers reaching for the sky. I stopped at the edge of the water, my heart racing. I could feel the pull of the lake, a deep, insistent tug in my chest, like a magnet drawing me closer. I could hear the faint echo of the voices, softer now, more distant but still there, still calling. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the bundle the old woman had given me. I wasn't sure what to do with it, or if it would help, but I figured it was better than nothing. I took a deep breath and waded into the water, the cold seeping through my clothes and biting against my skin. The water was deeper than I'd expected, reaching my waist within a few steps, and I could feel the mud sucking at my boots, making it hard to move. I pushed forward, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, my heart pounding. The voices grew louder as I moved deeper into the lake. The water reached my chest and shoulders until I was swimming, the cold cutting through me like a knife. I could feel the pull of the voices, stronger now, more insistent, like hands grasping at my limbs, pulling me down. I kept swimming, pushing forward, my eyes fixed on the lake's center, where the water seemed darkest and the mist thickest. I didn't know what I was looking for, but knew I had to keep going and reach the center. And then suddenly I felt it. A sharp, cold pain in my chest, like a spear driving through me. I gasped, my body tensing, and I felt myself sinking, pulled down by some unseen force. The water closed over my head, the world going dark, and I felt a cold, crushing weight pressing down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I tried to fight it and swim back to the surface, but it was like swimming through tar, with every movement slow and agonizing. I could feel the pull of the lake, the cold, insistent grip of the water dragging me down into the darkness. The voices were all around me now, louder, sharper, a cacophony that seemed to pierce through my mind, filling my thoughts with static. I could feel their presence in the water, their hands grasping at me, their fingers like ice against my skin. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on, how much longer I could keep fighting. My lungs burned, my body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. I could feel the darkness closing in, the cold seeping into my bones, numbing my limbs and mind. And then, just as I was about to give in to let the darkness take me, I saw a faint glow in the water deep below, a soft greenish light pulsing like a heartbeat, drawing me toward it. I felt a surge of hope, a desperate, frantic burst of energy, and I kicked hard, pushing myself down toward the light. The water grew colder as I descended, and the light became brighter and more intense. I could see something down there, a shape, a figure standing in the depths, bathed in that eerie green glow. I reached out, my fingers brushing against a stone's cold, smooth surface, a stone covered in strange, swirling symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light. I knew instinctively that this was it. This was the source, the heart of the curse. I had to break it. I had to destroy it. With the last strength, I grabbed the stone, pulling it free from the muck holding it. The moment I touched it, I felt a surge of energy, a jolt of electricity that shot through my body, driving the cold from my limbs and the fog from my mind. I kicked hard, pushing myself back toward the surface, the stone clutched tightly in my hand. I could feel the water churning around me, the voices rising in a frantic, desperate wail. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to reach the surface. I had to get out. The water broke around me and I gasped, sucking in a lungful of cold, fresh air. I could see the shore, a distant blur through the mist, and I started swimming, every muscle burning, every breath a struggle. The voices were louder now, more desperate, a chorus of screams filling the air, but I ignored them. Focusing on the shore and the small, flickering light that marked the cabin, I reached the shore, collapsing onto the muddy bank, my body trembling, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I could feel the stone in my hand, still pulsing with that strange rhythmic energy, and I knew what I had to do. I raised the stone above my head and brought it down hard against a rock, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The moment the stone broke, the air seemed to shift, a deep rumbling sound echoing across the lake. I felt a wave of warmth wash over me, driving the cold, the darkness, and the fear away. The voices stopped, the lake falling silent, and I knew it was over. I lay there on the bank staring at the sky, my body aching, my mind numb. I didn't know how long I lay there, but eventually I heard footsteps, and the old woman appeared beside me, her face lined with worry and relief. "You did it," she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "You did it." I nodded, too exhausted to speak, and she helped me to my feet, her hands gentle, steady. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you inside. You're safe now. You're finally safe." And I believed her for the first time in what felt like forever. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and share your scary encounters. Also, consider joining the Fear Frequencies community for exclusive perks and early access to new content. Your support helps us create even more thrilling stories. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider leaving a super thanks.